Drummer Terri Lyne Carrington and pianist Chris Davis have maintained rigorous touring and recording schedules despite increasing duties at Berklee College of Music's Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice. Carrington, who we speak to first this week, released Waiting Game in 2019 and earned a Grammy nod for the effort. That same year, Davis issued diatom ribbons through her own imprint. I'm Dave Cantor, and this is the best of our knowledge. Was there a specific instance that led to your conception of the Institute, or had you just been thinking about what a difficult path academia offers?
I think throughout my career, a lot of young women have talked to me about their difficulties. And though I didn't have those same experiences, eventually I think my heart opened up to really understanding that just because I'm a certain way, so have a certain personality, have a certain fighter, warrior spirit, everybody doesn't and shouldn't have to be able to follow their own passion and dreams through playing music. So I think once I fully embraced that, I started getting angry and, decided to, fight for what I believed was right. And I had some discussions with some students at Berkeley that were telling me terrible stories. And I think that was the turning point. And that was probably 2017.
There were some pretty high-profile departures from Berkeley in 2017 after allegations of sexual misconduct. Were there discussions around those incidents and how they were handled by the school when you're putting the program together?
The discussions I was having, those were with students that were not being necessarily sexually harassed, but just being harassed in other ways, like somebody telling them that they needed to do their hair better before they came to class. Crazy things like that really made me irate. Not giving them solos, those kinds of things. I had no direct conversations with anybody about sexual harassment. When you think about a school as big as it is, of course, there's zero tolerance for that. There are a few of those instances, and the college moved swiftly to try to rectify those situations. And those, of course, are really important to address, but there's a larger culture of how women are just treated in music and outside of music. But we're dealing with, with jazz and the music industry in general. And that's the thing that, we're really working at transforming because that's something that affects everybody, not just addressing the small, very small percentage of women that were sexually harassed at Berkeley.
You've been teaching there since 2005, I believe. So how has running the program changed what your day-to-day work life looks like?
When I first started teaching there, I was doing mostly drum lessons, private lessons, and then also a couple of ensembles. And I think I got burnt out teaching drum lessons because I really don't love the instrument enough to just do that all day. I mean, it's okay, but it's not my, I don't feel quite as fulfilled doing that. I really enjoyed ensemble teaching better than private lessons. And then I started doing mostly ensemble work with Global Jazz Institute, run by Danilo Perez. And I did that for about 3 years. Um, and then I really just felt the need to make my own contribution surrounding this topic and this issue that no matter how much you talk about it in an article, or it just seemed like something that was able to, you know, to be mentioned, but not something that people were really taking ownership in. People that are deeply embedded in the jazz culture, really taking ownership and changing. So what happens is you have women talking about an issue, not even all women, some women talking about an issue, and it feels like they're over there in their own corner. They're in this group, so you feel a bit othered. And what I really needed is for the whole community to embrace this as something that we all have to work toward changing.
The program's only a few years old at this point, and obviously the pandemic shaped how it's developed. But is there an instance of some radical success that's helping point you to the future?
The biggest thing that lets me know we're pointed in the right direction uh, is the response of the students. We have about 45 students, about 50-50, male, female, and some non-binary students. Um, what we found is both men and women don't like to really practice this kind of hypermasculinity that we're seeing. And women tend to copy, this behavior in a sense, to be successful. And I think what we're trying to say is you should be able to bring your authentic self to the table and, kind of not look at how things have been done so much. I mean, of course, we have to look at the history of the music and this kind of masculinity that's been embedded in the art form is great. And we all have to, I think, understand why that is. And also, that aesthetic comes through in all of our playing, women that have been successful. But it's an interesting question to wonder what the music sounds like without as much of that, what the other possibilities are. Is there a different sound aesthetic that we haven't explored yet? Those kinds of questions are things that I'm asking myself. Um, and we don't really know because it hasn't happened yet. But what I have seen is a lot of prominent figures in jazz that are starting to hire more women. And that is a huge success because I think when they do that, they're addressing the issue and encouraging others that follow them. And the younger generation, I think, is a little more in tune with that, and that's exciting to me. They're not as caught up with gender roles um, and the ideas that about instruments themselves being gendered. They're not as surprised to see a young woman playing drums, that playing great as people of my generation and before me are. So I'm very excited about this generation. I think that they're getting a lot of things right. They do need guidance, and we're hoping, um, that we're helping to crank out some great, not just players, but thinkers and uh, hopefully even scholars at some point, so that all of these areas are being covered and all of these areas are being addressed. How the music's being written about, how it's played, of course, how it's composed, all those things.
Why was Chris Davis the first instructor you hired?
A couple of reasons. One, I think she's just one of the most exciting uh, newer pianists on the scene. And I really enjoyed playing with her. And I feel like contemporary improvisation and contemporary composition are not as prominent at Berklee. So I thought there was a real space for her. And I felt like she understood the message and, had experienced some of the same things that we wanted to address. And she had her own way of thinking about it, dealing with it, as we all do. But I think it's important to um, come together and understand that this is collective work. And there's no one way of doing things. There's no one group of people, no one organization that's really defining how the work is done, because there's a lot of people doing it in different ways, and it's that kind of collective work that actually makes a movement and will help to move the needle as well.
I saw you play in Chicago recently along with Rudresh Mahan Thapa, the saxophonist, and you were with your ensemble Social Science and played music from an album that earned a Grammy nomination. So can you talk about the ideals that the Berklee program is based on and how those are reflected in your bands and on recordings?
Social science is really trying to address many issues of social justice. And gender justice, of course, is one of them. And I think a big part of our point is that they're all connected. All the social justice issues, struggles are connected. You can't really fight for racial justice without acknowledging gender justice or environmental justice or food justice or any of these other issues. They're really all connected, and it's mostly, of course, marginalized communities that are affected the most with any of the social justice issues. So I think that's the foundation. I mean, we have to be able to understand that the environmental justice is how important that is, and that's the mother of all justice struggles, really. Um, and the people in the group, we come from different backgrounds, uh, and I think that we're all in tune with these things. So I think that makes it a strong group of individuals to talk about these issues from different perspectives. So I'm very excited every time I play with them. And we're working on some new music now to have a second album. It's taking a minute because everybody's so busy.
This is a question I ask everyone, and maybe particularly pertinent here, but is there an interaction with a teacher or mentor from the past that kind of sticks out in your mind?
Wow, there's a lot of those. I've had the good fortune to have many mentors, starting with Jack DeJohnette and Wayne Shorter, and also people like Bernice Johnson Regan and Angela Davis. I've learned from just a lot of different people: Clark Terry, uh, Dizzy Gillespie, Max Roach. All of them have given me some words of wisdom, some guidance, something that I've carried with me. Uh, I think Wayne Shorter is probably the most quotable because he always says things that just have a way of sticking. He's told me that music is just a drop in the ocean of life. Um, he's told me, what's one night in the eyes of eternity? Uh, just a lot of different things. But he made me start to understand more about playing music, but playing life instead of music, looking at how music and life are really connected in one thing, not something outside of yourself, not something separate. Yeah, I would have to say he's the most prolific. Even most recently, he said something to the effect of, playing or composing something to see what's going to happen, not because it works.
We're listening to Rhizomes, a track off Diatom Ribbons, a 2019 album led by Chris Davis with Terri Lyne Carrington on drums. The pianist has released dozens of albums during the past 2 decades and continues to compose and perform music that's as demanding as it is thoughtful and engaging. She joined the best of our knowledge to chat a bit about working on staff in the program that Carrington founded at Berkeley. You were the first faculty hire in 2019 and became Associate Program Director of Creative Development for the Berklee Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice. So tell me what that entails and how you connected with Terri Lyne Carrington, who founded the program.
Sure. Well, first, I'd like to congratulate you on saying the title correctly. It's a long one. I think we all smile after, like, okay, take a breath. It's a long title. But yeah, I met Terri Lyne Carrington in 2017, I think. She reached out to do some playing, and we started playing. We went to Taipei and played a concert, and shortly after that concert, Jerry Allen passed away, and she's a wonderful pianist, composer that Terri was very close with. And Terri asked if I could play some tribute concerts for her throughout the year with amazing artists like Esperanza Spalding and Linda Mahan O and Val Genti. So we just started a musical relationship, friendship, and it kind of grew from playing music together. And right around that time, Terri was starting the Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice, and asked if I would be interested in teaching at the program. And I was, very, very interested to definitely work with Terri and also support her mission through the Institute. So that's kind of how it all started. And I've been there almost 3 years now. And my job title is somewhat vague because we were starting a new institution at the time. And so figuring out what my responsibilities, they're still unfolding at this point. Part of my duties are some outreach work. I teach multiple ensembles within the Institute. I teach some lessons. I provide opportunities for students to perform. I've taken the students on trips to various locations for concerts, to also give them opportunities to teach usually high school students.
Jazz and gender justice is a pretty singular premise for a program. So how's that affected your approach in the classroom?
The mission of the Institute is to dismantle patriarchy and gender disparity in jazz. And so the way that we're addressing some of these issues, the very first thing is that we try to create gender balance within our ensembles. So the ensembles are populated with no more than 50% male students. We have quite a few non-binary and transgender students in our program as well. And so it kind of creates an environment of inclusion. I think the students feel that.
Do you think about your own time studying at the University of Toronto and see differences in the tenor of what you're doing now and what you experienced as a student?
Yeah, I mean, there's a big difference. There's also a big difference in the mindset for me personally. And I think other artists of my age group and a little older, because I've heard Terri talk about this often, and other older women performers, just the mindset of not thinking about gender when they were up and coming, trying to make it as a player. Not wanting to call attention to gender, because then you do an interview and someone would say, like, what is it like to be a woman jazz pianist, and so like there was kind of this overall mentality of like, I'm not going to think about my gender or talk about it. I don't want to be known for that, for being a woman in jazz. I just want to be an artist in jazz. That's kind of shifted now, where we're looking more at, what's actually happening here, what's happening, how are we going to make change? And it's very hard to make change without really acknowledging what the issues are. And so now there's much more, I see more women composers and performers speaking up about the issues and the things they've experienced, mainly for, hope that things will change for the younger generations. If it's addressed now and looked at and talked about, especially in jazz education, hopefully things will change for that younger generation.
How do you teach someone to improvise? It seems like a thought process in part.
Well, improvisation really means making something up on the spot. I mean, once you kind of engage in that practice, then you start to fine tune your intuition and instincts about what might work and what might not work. And you start to go into, the whole study of improvisation and also tradition. And that's why, like, it's so important for young people to study a tradition. And I don't even say jazz tradition because it doesn't have to be that. But you do have to understand the rules of certain kind of music to then be able to use those tools and also to question them and, break them if that's, what's needed in your own music. So
I've read your recollections in other interviews about moving to New York and encountering players like saxophonist Tony Malaby. Is there a way to replicate kind of the revelatory moments like that playing live in a classroom?
Yeah, I think it is possible to replicate it. I mean, it's going to be in a different environment. When I moved to New York, people like Tony, as you mentioned, took me in as a mentor, and I would go to his house on the weekends with other musicians and play concerts and play sessions. And, he would instruct us on how we could maybe improve our improvisation as a group. And Tony is now teaching at Berkeley, as am I. And, the environments changed, the locations changed, but the information and the experience, that hasn't changed. We're still, both of us now are bringing students in, playing with them and talking about, conceptual ways to deal with composition, improvisation. I mean, there's no substitute for playing with a student and for them to feel, your energy and your sound. And so even tonight I'm performing with one of my students at his recital.
Have you had to reckon with Berkeley's kind of long tail history as a pillar of the music, but also kind of an exclusive one, I suppose?
Yeah, that's a big question. Well, the exclusivity, first of all, there's the financial exclusivity, and that's going to affect, certainly socioeconomic groups and people of color disproportionately. So I don't know if I have an answer for that. Berkeley, I think the tuition now is up to $78,000 with room and board. That's a big chunk for people. Unfortunately, I don't have the answers, but it's something that's talked about often at Berkeley. And I think there are scholarships and things, but ultimately it's not enough, and I think that's a conversation that is constantly taking place at Berkeley as to how do we be more inclusive to the applicants, who want to come to school and play music. I was talking to Terri yesterday about just the mission of Berkeley and the idea that when Berkeley was a school starting out, they said, like, any student can come. If they want to study music, we don't turn anyone away. And she was saying, like, I just really love that idea. And, if a student, it's like, how do you decide who to accept based on, or maybe I'll phrase this in a different way, that there are certain expectations and there's a kind of a guardrail as to, like, what is jazz and what isn't. And you have to, in most institutions, you're expected to be able to do those certain things to be accepted, like play arpeggios or scales or, play a blues or swing. And so when we're looking at, bringing more students of color into Berkeley, especially from, poor communities, then what is it that, how do we determine if a student can come to Berkeley? If we take those expectations away, like, what are we looking for? I guess I'm kind of talking around what I'm trying to get to here, but I'm just saying that those sorts of expectations, I don't know, they're loosening at Berklee in a way, so that people aren't always looking at, being able to do the technical functional things, but more looking at their overall person, and their natural ability as players, what they're interested in, and not limiting, whether someone is good or not, or worthy or not, based on certain kinds of expectations in the music.
In 2016, you started Pyroclastic Records to release your own albums, as well as those of like-minded players. So it's set up as a nonprofit, and people who release music through the label retain ownership of the masters. Does this jigsaw, together with discussions around privilege, race, class, gender, patriarchy, and sexual orientation that the Berklee program is working to address?
Well, there's not a lot of discussion because I'm the president, so I don't know who I'd be talking to. But the most important, the mission of the institute is to support non-commercial creative artists. So that's one of the major components. Then also looking at there's not a lot of opportunity out there for artists to release their music and also have financial support. And so it's been really important to me to give opportunities to women, to people of color. And it's not a perfect science, but we're releasing 5 to 6 albums a year. And I'm being conscious of, who those opportunities are going to.
I ask everyone this question, but is there an interaction with a teacher or mentor that kind of sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, certainly Tony Malaby, as you mentioned, when I first moved to New York. Well, first, actually, I went to the Banff Center for the Arts, a summer program that lasted for about 3 weeks. And Kenny Warner was running the program. It was run by various amazing artists over the last 40 years. But that's where I met Tony. And I was having a bit of a hard time I was one of the youngest students at the time, trying to find, where I could fit in here. And Tony, he just saw something, I guess, in me that he responded to and was super supportive. And I started playing with him at the workshop. And then when I moved to New York, he said, call me, let's play. And so, as I mentioned, I was going over every weekend and playing and just asking all sorts of questions. And he encouraged me to study composition and start bringing in composition into the practice of free improvisation and blending the two. So I started studying with Jim McNeely, incredible pianist, composer, who was such a great teacher and mentor for me. And that kind of set me on a path of exploring that idea of free improvisation and composition and blurring the lines between the two. And I'm still, doing that. I'm still searching for that perfect balance. It's part of my, my practice as an artist still. So that was a real turning point.